The topic of maximizing social impact is being offered today because we live in uncertain times. And it's really imperative that we look at innovative ways of doing our work. I've been asked to start the discussion off precisely because the Agency of the Future tries to tackle the challenges of funding and shifting immigration policy by exploring and presenting promising practices. In the next 10 minutes, I will briefly describe the project, outline the challenges facing the sector that make it a necessity for us to think differently about our work, and then give 2 examples of how some agencies are trying to adapt to the new realities. Next slide. The Agency of the Future began as a partnership between Pathways to Prosperity and OCASI. I hate when people make that mistake. It's now getting to me too. Pathways to Prosperity is an alliance of university, community, and government partners that basically work to foster welcoming communities. The Agency of the Future project, as I say, has been taken up by Pathways to Prosperity and OCASI, and Carl Nicholson of OCASI and Mayor Bernstein of the Pathways to Prosperity are leading this project. Next slide. The core ideas behind this project are that settlement agencies really have an advantage in the work that we do. An advantage because we have special expertise that we have acquired through just the work that we do, but also the challenges that have faced us for so many years, where we have been, creatively combined federal, provincial, municipal, and other sources of funding in complementary ways to provide seamless services to our clients. But in addition, settlement agencies are able to mobilize newcomers and ethnocultural and religious organizations because we enjoy their trust. We work with them very closely, and this gives us clearly a strategic advantage in our work. Also, there is already, and this is one of the core ideas behind this Agency of the Future project, there is extensive innovation happening in the settlement sector. And what we want to do is collect those innovative approaches from across the country and then disseminate them to you to see what we can learn and how we can address the challenges that are facing us. Next slide. So what we want to do, what I want to do now is basically touch on 10 factors, give you 1 or 2 sentences for each of these factors to set the scene in terms of what the challenges, and also when you see these factors, you'll see that there are opportunities there too. And these are the things that are basically forcing us to do our work differently. Number 1, in terms of fiscal changes, we've all experienced funding cuts, primarily from our federal partners. Provincial and municipal funding has also been flatlined now for a number of years, and the situation is unlikely to correct itself anytime in the near future. Number 2, the decline in Ontario's manufacturing sector and the westward shift of economic activity has boosted Western demand for immigrants and temporary workers. This has produced a westerly shift in immigration, resulting in fewer immigrants settling in Ontario. Number 3, more newcomers are moving to metro-adjacent communities, as well as to smaller towns and more remote locations. This is driven by resource-based economic activity and the cost of housing. Number 4, there is a significant increase in the proportion of economic migrants within the overall immigration portfolio. By example, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, Express Entry, Provincial Nominee Programs are all economic migrants. In addition, this is complicated by new requirements in the immigration process, such as higher levels of English or French language ability. Next slide. Number 5, constraints on family class migration, coupled with higher language requirements and a greater reliance on temporary workers to fill low-skilled jobs, will produce shifts in source countries, analogous to those experienced in Australia, where they're finding that the majority of immigrants are now arriving from English-speaking countries. Number 6, the fiscal and provincial pendulum has swung back to Ottawa. By way of example, was about a year and a half ago, the repatriation of settlement services from the province to the federal level, both in BC and in Manitoba. This has created little provincial appetite for incremental spending on newcomer settlement services. And the fiscal pressures are now pushing provincial ministries to confine their expenditures to core mandates. Number 7, we are seeing the rise of 3 stakeholder groups into positions of prominence on migration matters. And these are employers, educational institutions, and municipalities. Employers and educational institutions have assumed a major role in the selection and recruitment of newcomers. Think of express entry and temporary foreign workers for employers and international students for educational institutions. Their involvement in settlement integration, on the other hand, has been secondary to their main purpose. In contrast, municipalities have focused on settlement and adaptation involving areas that include housing, health, education, social services, recreation, and so on. All 3 stakeholders require and regularly access outside expertise in migration matters, especially settlement. Number 8, the sharp increase in settlement funding starting in 2006 under COYA attracted new organizations to the settlement business. These include institutions such as schools and libraries and community colleges. Their advantage is that their core operations are already funded by government, so they only need to cover operating expenses. Number 9, sorry, I can't count. Settlement agencies have evolved greatly in size and capacity. The trend has been to larger agencies that are better able to exploit new opportunities. And finally, really new technologies have been slow to fully penetrate the settlement sector. Nevertheless, and this is where real opportunity exists, they offer opportunities for projecting the settlement expertise, which is currently concentrated in major centers, to remote parts of Canada and abroad. Next slide. The Agency of the Future takes a business model approach to its work. We know the major issue is funding. How can we commercialize what we do so that it is sustainable? That is the question it tries to answer. So, next slide. I want to give you 2 examples of promising practices. And this builds on the idea of the Agency of the Future in terms of one of its core concepts, that the expertise already resides in the sector. But one example is the Consortium of Agencies Serving Internationally Trained Persons, known as Kassip. And as you can see from the slide, there are 11 organizations involved in this collaborative approach, and these 11, three of those 11 organizations are community colleges. The second example will be the Welcome Center system as an immigrant service hub, and there are 5 organizations that you see listed there that are running that system in York Region. Next slide. The Kassip example. Basically, Kassip was formed 16 years ago by a number of organizations, now numbering 11, as I say. Basically, for us to find ways to better serve internationally trained professionals. These organizations all have an employment mandate as part of their larger mandate. And so more recently, what we decided to do was to basically take our collaboration to a higher level, where we involved our boards of directors in our planning and established 5 work groups to explore some of the challenges that we are facing. So 2 of the work groups, as you can see on that list, worked on infrastructural issues. One of them being, how can we learn from each other on managing performance targets for our employment services? How can we better ensure that we are finding jobs for people? And what are the different organizations doing? The second group looked at how do we provide those learnings to each other through a staff development process, and decided that perhaps a community of practice approach would be best. So you've got now 11 organizations basically doing that kind of planning. But on top of it, we know the challenge is express entry, and we established 3 work groups to look at how do we prepare ourselves with what little information we have on express entry, but to be ready. Apparently it's going to come through in January, and we know very little about it. But we know enough that it's going to be different, it's going to be driven by employers and so on. So, and we know people are coming with jobs, and we're organizations that find people jobs. So what role can we play? And so the one group looked at exploring what we know about the program and exploring the experience of express entry in Australia and New Zealand to see what we could learn from that. Another group actually did a survey of employers to find out, would they use it? What kind of services would they need? You know, we heard some interesting things. Employers said, you know, if it's going to take us 6 months to get a recruitment from express entry, we're not going to use it. So there were a lot of learnings in terms of what kind of services we could provide. And the third group basically looked at developing service packages. And this is where the social enterprise piece comes in, because some of these packages are already funded by government, and so we will provide them freely, whether it's English classes and so on. Others are not, and so we would sell them to employers for a fee. And so this is something, by way of example, how when you've got a collaborative of that size, you can actually move on something this complicated and actually get the research done. And so we're waiting now to hear from Express where the government is going so that we can provide one point of access for employers and not a fragmented approach. Last slide. The last slide is about, whether it comes up or not, it's about the welcome centers. And the welcome centers are immigrant service hubs in York Region and in Durham. I will speak about the 5 in York Region because I'm more directly involved there. And basically, these are 5 multi-service centers that are operated by jointly operated by 5 agencies. And so that in itself is an innovative approach in that we're bringing our various talents to the table. But here's where I think it takes it to a whole other level, in that we decided we were going to leave space in the centers for community organizations. And so we currently have 36 associate partner agreements with other organizations that provide services out of the welcome centers. Last year, those partners provided 31,000 service hours through the centers. And basically what we're talking about are partners like the community health clinic that provides flu shots. We're talking about partners that provide yoga classes for seniors, a Russian group that formed, they were clients and decided they had things in common, and they're now developed a social club and they come together at the welcome centers. The impact is that the York Region LIP did a study of immigrants and basically found that 64% of immigrants in York Region used a welcome center for services. That's very high. So I give those two examples to help us think a little differently about how we can develop in new directions and have stronger impact with what we already have. Thank you very much.